Clear prop.
Star 738, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Pleasantville. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I am fantastic as always. This is episode 121, I believe, and we're going to call this show Flying Common Sense. We did a last show a couple weeks ago was about, maybe it was a month ago, learning from your mistakes. Then we had a good guest on from the Thunderbirds, and a few comments on social media and some instant messages and mail we got. Talked about some of the stuff from learning from your mistakes could be considered common sense, and we thought we'd flip some of that mistake making and turn it into common sense things that maybe will make you a better pilot. And we're going to break it down into really 3 sections. So general flying, things that flight schools and CFIs can do to teach students maybe slightly different than we do typically. And then talk about what Wally sees on check rides that a little common sense might cure the problem to make your experience better on a check ride. Bunch of stories we're going to talk about, a bunch of little scenarios we're going to talk about. But let's talk about really one of the things we have a ton of listens on, and that's ATC. Wally, how important is it just to listen to ATC? How much common sense does it make to listen to air traffic control when you're flying your plane?
Well, that's imperative. We did an episode many episodes ago called 2 Ears, 1 Mouth, and the point was just maybe listening is more important than talking. And you can learn so much by listening. And when I say listening, I'm not just saying taking the words in and processing them, but what does that person mean? So Bobby, if you and I are going to eat lunch, and we're sitting across the table from each other, and you order a burger and fries, and you're sitting there, and you're 2/3 of the way done with your hamburger and French fries, and you got a pickle sitting on your plate, and you haven't touched the pickle, and I look across at you and I say, "Are you going to eat that pickle?" What am I really saying?
Eat it or I'm going to eat it.
Exactly. What I'm saying is, can I have your pickle? Okay. I'm not saying it. I don't just flat out come and say, "Hey, you're going to eat can I eat that pickle?" I'm going to, we kind of talk in code. So let's say you're flying along and air traffic control says, enter a right base, runway 36. Traffic is a citation on a 6-mile final. Okay. Enter a right base. Traffic's a citation on a 6-mile final. Well, again, assume that you're in a Warrior or 172, 100-knot cruise type airplane. What's ATC telling you? They're telling you to, kind of get going, kind of get out of the way. Now, he's telling you that you're probably number 1, but he's also telling you to, to hustle, okay? Don't do anything unsafe, but you got to read between the lines. Or listen between the lines.
There's definitely many occasions where that happens when you're in the air, and you've told stories when you're going to Honolulu. You listen to the six aircraft in front of you, all being told, to do one thing, and you're pretty confident that you're going to get the same information when you get to that point as well, right? And that's pretty common sense-ish. I think one I talked about is a little bit more when you're on the ground, listening maybe to ground control. And we're lucky we work at a pretty busy airport with ground operations. And as soon as I start the aircraft, I'm listening to ground and trying to build a picture in my brain what's going on the ground and what's going on, if I'm able to listen to both ground and tower, kind of what's going on in the air. But specifically ground, if I hear someone saying, "I'm at the south end of the airport and I need to taxi to the north end. I'm at the north end. I want to get on the runway and go. I'm midfield, and I want to taxi there. I kind of know I'm midfield. There's at least 3 bogeys out there in that airport environment that I've got to manage or get in the flow with, and I need to listen to where I'm going to fit, because you don't want to cut someone off. You don't want to be surprised. There's a lot that can do for you on the ground and to participate in the overall system, even though you're still on the ground.
Right. Do we drive our cars differently on the road when it's a driving rainstorm than a clear day? I'd like to say the answer is yes. I know I sure do. You're a little bit probably slower, more cautious, and by listening, and you hear that airplane's on the south end taxiing north, it's like there's a little rainstorm out there. Hey, be careful. Maybe look to your left. Be aware of what's going on. Expect to see that airplane coming from the left.
Yeah, it just gives you information that you wouldn't have if you weren't listening. And then the sooner you're able to switch and listen to tower while you're on ground, monitoring tower while you're on ground, you get an idea of what's happening, whether, hey, there's 3 planes in the pattern. And this isn't something that I'm expecting private pilots to be able to do, but I would think instrument-rated pilots could start building that picture of the sky above them, that, hey, there's somebody's just been handed over from approach, and they've been asked to slow down because they're going 165 knots, overtaking a Cessna by 100 miles, 100 knots or something like that. You kind of get an idea. There's some big stuff out there. There's some slow stuff out there. I might be sitting at the whole short line for a while, waiting for my turn to go. It just builds to your overall picture of what's going on around you, and will make you a better pilot.
Yeah, you can use some simple math. 60 knots is 1 mile a minute. 120 knots is 2 miles a minute. And if you kind of know airplanes, you get an idea of their speed. If you're at the hold short line and they say hold short, there's a Cessna on a 2 mile final. Well, a Cessna's probably doing just a little bit over 60 knots. So that's about 2 minutes, maybe a little bit less. So I'm expecting to wait there maybe in minute 45, something like that. So if I got doors open, windows open that I'm going to close before I actually take off, I have a game plan. I have a game plan. Now, sometimes the game plan changes, but right now I'm thinking, okay, I got about another minute before I want to close this door or close the window.
Yep. Let's talk about some examples where we were planning, obviously, for this show, and we were talking about flying fast and flying slow. I had an instructor, still an assistant chief at our school, who helped me with my multi-engine, and I don't think I knew it was common sense until he told me, of course, and I was working on my multi-engine rating, so I was pretty far down the road. He said, when we started to descend into Austin one time, he's like, "Why are you descending so slow?" And I thought I was right at the bottom of the yellow arc. And I thought, well, this is where I've been told to be. And he's like, well, it's calm day. It's clear outside. There's no bumps. Why aren't you in the yellow arc? And it's like, well, that's the cautionary, trying to act like a big badass that I was. That's the cautionary area. I don't want to get into that. And he's like, well, do you really know what that means? And we had this discussion, and, he's like, air traffic control is expecting you to descend much faster than you're descending, and they're trying to work you into traffic. Again, maybe they didn't say all that, but as a commercial multi-engine pilot, you need to know that. And he said, get that into the yellow arc, and unless we feel bumps, the POH says we're in perfectly normal operating conditions to be able to go faster. And I always took that as like this aha moment for myself, where maybe we teach so much of the most safe mechanisms about these aircraft that we don't get taught how to not push the envelope, but get into a zone where we need to know if it's uncomfortable, not because it's just painted yellow, right? Does that make sense?
Right. And that's another thing. I mean, we can descend these airplanes not in idle. Okay, we can just push the nose over and change the pitch of the airplane and get it heading toward the ground, and we can descend fast. The only way to descend is not a slow idle descent. And I'll just let the cat out of the bag a little bit. It's something I see on check rides when we do a divert scenario. And when I give a divert scenario, it's not, hey, that airport over there has really good milkshakes. Let's divert over there. The reason I give a divert scenario that's an emergency. We need to get on the ground, whether it be a physical issue with me or a problem with the airplane, a mechanical problem with the airplane that, maybe we got low oil pressure, high oil temperature. Right now the airplane's still running, but under those circumstances, we probably ought to get the airplane on the ground. And so maybe going fast to that airport is the way to go.
Yeah, and I don't think that's something we teach necessarily, right? I think we still teach procedures, and I think I'm saying as a flight school owner, there's some opportunity there for us to take this framework that we call scenario-based training and make it a little bit more scenario-based. I had a great opportunity that came up as we were preparing for the show that we talked about in my past. When I was an instrument student, I had a lot of opportunity to fly at night, which was really good instrument training for me. And we were flying at night one time, and I don't know what we were doing on that particular day, but we checked in with the tower as we were coming back, and the tower said, you only have 8 minutes. The airport's closing. We're mowing. And it was NOTAM'd or something, and we missed it. Maybe we didn't listen to the ATC or something. But my instructor said, there was zero hesitation. He says, my controls, we're getting back. And he pushed the gas all the way forward and kind of put the nose over a little bit so we could get maximum rate of ground speed to get to that airport. And sure enough, we got in with seconds to spare. And there was a different sense of urgency than there had ever been that I got to experience that I thought was really interesting. Like, man, I had no idea. There was no calmness to getting into a pattern and trying to make 3 right-hand turns and, do all the things that you do 97% of the time when you're a student. We went right to the numbers. And when you hear that occasionally, direct to the numbers, we still probably all go a little bit of a bend and out and turn in. This guy went direct to the numbers, and we got on the ground in about 7.5 minutes. And that's a scenario that I think flight instructors could come up with on a regular basis. We all probably have an EFB on our leg that says ETA to your destination is 17 minutes. Is there any way we can get there in 12, 13 safely? Like, it's a good practice because if you never practice it and someone is sick, you're going to make a mistake because you've never practiced it. Make the mistakes during practice. Right.
If you're driving down the road in a car, and your passenger says, I'm having a medical situation that they wouldn't say this, but they're having a medical situation that requires immediate emergency care. You're going to drive fast to an ER, and if you can safely run a red light, you're probably going to run a red light. Okay, I think everybody listening here would say, yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to exceed the speed limit. I'm going to break the law. Okay, let's just cut right to the chase. And if a police officer stopped you, he'd probably give you an escort, or he would take the person with him. And the FARs tell us we can break the law to the extent needed to meet an emergency. Now, I'm not. What I'm saying is, if you need to divert and go to an airport, can we land straight in? You're darn right we can land straight in.
With the wind, Wally? With the wind?
We can land straight in with a tailwind. I wouldn't land on a 5,000-foot runway with a 26 knot tailwind, but I'd feel comfortable. Well, I'm not even going to give the number, but let's say you've got a 1836 runway configuration, and the wind is 180 at 6 knots. Can we land runway 36? Darn right we can, and it's probably something we ought to practice. So I'm not saying to the flight instructors to go find the local airport and land downwind when there are 4 airplanes in the traffic pattern. But there's going to be a day when you're over there and you're the only airplane, and that's a great opportunity to just say, hey, let's do a downwind landing just to show you. If you get down there and things aren't working out, you can go around, okay? But this is something worth practicing. We don't want to try something the first time in a real life scenario.
Yeah, I had the opportunity with my instructors to do that, and we were pretty far out of Houston and at an uncontrolled field, and we knew no one was in the area, no one was talking. We had flown the pattern the right direction a few laps. No one was out there, and we flew it where we got a couple of downwind landings. But it was, like you said, 4 to 6 knots. It was not a situation that would have put us in any harm or jeopardy. But you can read the POH and see what the distance would be with a downwind configuration. But until you feel it and see just how far you float, and that you don't get on the ground like you're expecting, it's going to be a different scenario. You definitely don't want to experience that the first time when you're having an emergency, for sure.
Right. I think Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, you don't forget that thought, but you were going to talk about the calling the place you rented the aircraft from under a couple scenarios that does seem like common sense when you say it, but probably isn't common sense when you're flying the plane.
Yeah, one of the scenarios that we do on a commercial and a private is an emergency landing, and so we set up for a emergency landing off airport. Probably it may be on airport if we happen to be close, but a lot of times sometimes the applicant is unsuccessful, and we're not going to make it. We are not going to make it in the field that they chose, and I will say to them, as we debrief, I'll say, okay, if that were really that situation, what would you have done differently? And a lot of times they'll say, well, gee, I was too fast. I was 121 knots coming down, and I couldn't get the flaps down because the flap speed is 120 knots. And I say, well, imagine these 2 phone calls. Phone call 1 is to the owner of the airplane, where you tell them, hey, the engine quit, and I tried to put it down in a field, and I missed, and it's hanging in a bunch of trees. I'm okay. I was able to climb down the tree, but the airplane is 50 feet up in the air hanging in some trees. The other phone call is, hey, the engine quit on the airplane. We had to put it down in a field. The airplane's in pretty good shape. I'm just fine. I think I probably I know I oversped the flaps. I had to get the flaps out at 125 knots to help get the airplane down. Which one is probably going to go a little bit better? I think the owner of the airplane is going to deal with a airplane that's intact and on the ground with oversped flaps, as opposed to the one that's hanging up in the trees. So, and just from a standpoint of you making it out alive, you're probably a lot better off making it out on the ground than up in some trees.
Yeah, there's no way we're suggesting doing these things in simulated scenarios, but having the wherewithal to think through the mechanism that would be common sense in the real-time scenario where you're having that experience for real. Don't sell yourself short that it has to be like the way you practiced it every time, because it's probably inevitable that it won't be like you practiced it when that time comes. The other last thing I'll say about just normal flying or normal ground operations that the assistant chief taught me was the expectation of what the tower and or the air traffic operations are thinking about when you're on the ground getting close to the whole short line. And I think it really opened my eyes. We filed a lot of flight plans in the Twin when I was doing my multi-training, and he just was like, you never switch over until we get to the whole short line. They're expecting you to switch over and say, I'm ready to go when you're approaching the whole short line. And he was trying to tell me that approaching was when I had nowhere else to go. Like if I was kind of landlocked on my last little taxiway, you're either going to turn around and go back, or you're going to, and you got to ask for that, or you're ready to go. And the tower needs to know you're ready to go for lots of reasons. But I found that as something that definitely seems like common sense now, but that wasn't making sense to me before. And at our local airport, more often than not, they say switch over when you're number one. What are your thoughts on that, Wally?
Well, what they say at our local airport is contact tower when you're number one. They don't tell you when to switch over. Okay, they say contact. And what a lot of our students interpret that to, or like almost, I'd say 99% of our students interpret contact tower when you're number one is to switch over to tower when you're number one. So you're sitting out there, you're number 4 in line. There's 4 airplanes ahead of you. There's 4 airplanes behind you. There's a long line of airplanes, and you're moving up one at a time. And we're monitoring ground, and so. We know of the airplane that's a half mile behind us. It just called for taxi from one of the flight schools. No offense, but I don't care about that airplane. But what I do care about is what did they just give the airplane that's 3 or 4 airplanes in front of us? They gave him runway heading. Okay. The next guy, he got runway heading. The next airplane, he gets runway heading. Okay, now I'm thinking, pretty good chance I'm going to get runway heading, so I'm already planning for it. You know, if I planned a left turnout to go over here to this checkpoint, I'm already thinking, all right, we may go past that checkpoint because they may give us runway heading. So, again, what's behind you? There's no rear view mirrors in airplanes. So really what's behind you doesn't quite matter. Okay, but what's in front of you does. Yeah. So when they say contact tower when number one, they literally mean contact. There's no limitation as to when you can monitor tower. Now, if you're still in a area of the airport where ground control is doing a lot of controlling, yeah, obviously stay with ground control. But if you read the AIM, it talks when do you, that is one of the switchovers that you don't need to be told when to do it. When you go from ground control to tower, when you're at the end of the runway and ready to go, that's when you switch over.
And I know it is at our tower, and I bet it is at all but maybe super big towers, big airports, but they're like 6 feet from each other. They're going to know, hey, I can't get that plane that's at the end of the runway. Oh, I'll ask him. I mean, it's a group of people. They're working together in the greater system.
Yeah, absolutely. They're very, very, very likely in that same tower cab. Yeah. Another thing that this is another comparison I've used. So, when a young kid is in school, at some point they learn multiplication tables. Okay, I think at least they did when I was in school, but I hope kids are still learning this today. At some point, they're just learning and they're just memorizing that 3 times 3 is 9. Okay, they're memorizing that 8 times 6 is 48. Okay, but if all they do is memorize those numbers, but they can't apply that to practical use, what is the point? So, when I was in school, a typical math test, we would have all these math problems, and maybe at the end there would be 2 or 3 word problems. And everybody always hated the word problems. And I always loved the word problems because I thought, this is where the rubber meets the highway. This is the reason we're doing it. If the Jones family is a family of 4 and they're going on a picnic, and whoever's packing the lunch for the picnic wants to pack 2 Twinkies for each member of the family, you got to be able to go 4 times 2 is 8. And if I'm going an extra 2 maybe. But, you got to be able to apply that 4 times 2. And I feel like we're losing that common sense in flight training now. What I see is the applicants can do the maneuvers very well. I mean, I can't. Well, it's been a while since I've really had someone struggle with steep turns. You just go out and do the maneuver. Now, where they do struggle is when I give them something that's totally out of the box. Okay, this is going on with the airplane. Mechanically, this is what's going on right now. We're simulating this. What are you going to do about it? And I don't have a clue. And, of course, what I'm giving them is, trying to get them to divert. If we've got a low oil pressure, high oil temperature situation, we need to be aiming to a place to land the airplane. Hopefully we can make an airport. But we're going to aim towards the airport and always keep a plan B in our back pocket of a field or a road or something down below us. But do we want to go to that airport fast? Do we want to go slow? Do we want to keep the power where it is? I mean, me personally, if the engine is still running and we have indications of an issue, I'm not going to change the power. I'm not going to add power. I'm not going to take it away. I'm just going to keep it exactly where it is. I had a scenario on a check ride where the young man, we were taking off out of an airport to the east, and we're climbing, and then I look over, and all of a sudden we had no fuel pressure. But the engine was still running. And it was a Piper, so we had a fuel pump, and I turned the fuel pump on, and I said, okay, the check ride's over. We've got an issue. We're just going to head back. We headed back to our home airport, and at this point, we're about 30 miles away. And we maintain altitude. I said, look, we're going to just stay at this altitude until we are right smack dab over the airport. And we were pretty high. I want to say we're about 5,500 feet. So we just flew back at 5,500 feet. We had to get clearance to go into the Bravo, and we got over airport and circled down and landed. And we did have a fuel pump issue, but every scenario is a little bit different. So we got to, when you walk in the door of a flight school, they may tell you, we're going to teach you everything you want, everything you need to know to become a professional pilot. But they don't say that you still need to use common sense when you fly airplanes. And I think sometimes that goes out the door.
If we migrate to the teaching component, our chief has been a part of our school for almost 30 years now. Maybe it has been 30 years. And in some form or another, the one thing he talks a lot about is energy management. And, we hear high or low, fast or slow when we talk about that. But I think he talks about it a little differently from just managing the energy of what's possible with that plane. And I'm not sure, I think he does a really good job of it. I'm not sure the rest of us do a great job of teaching that energy management to our students, because we talk about pitch and throttle and airspeed and climbing and descending, but we're not really talking about energy. So that's a common sense thing that I hear all the time from my chief, that I would challenge everybody out there listening to work on it with whoever you're working with in your flight training, to really understand how to manage the energy of that aircraft, because in essence, as a pilot, that's really what you're doing.
Yeah.
Other things that I think are common sense that we don't teach because they're not in the syllabus. I doubt anyone's ever going to put them in a syllabus. The FAR AIM doesn't say you have to be required to know. The aeronautical knowledge is not how to put the cap on and off of an airplane, how to put the fuel nozzle into that airplane, and how to pump gas into that airplane. But the reality is if you want to be a pilot and you're going to fly general aviation, you're going to have to put gas in your airplane at some point. So make it common sense and have your instructor teach you how to put gas in an airplane. Make sure you know how to put gas in an airplane. If you don't have a credit card, you're probably not going to be able to put gas in an airplane when you get to a remote destination. So make sure you have a credit card. There's no one to pay these places nowadays. It's all electronic. And then take gas out. You got to take gas out if you're overweight. That's the only way you can solve that problem, or kick your girlfriend or boyfriend out of the plane. But more than likely, you're going to take fuel out of the plane to solve 6, 12, 18 pounds of issues, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I back to the fuel thing. I think it'd be really easy to say, well, I've got my airplane's at a really nice hangar. They pull it out for me. All I got to do is call them and say, hey, I'm leaving at 10 o'clock. I'd like to get the airplane topped off. And you could make the argument that I'm never going to go to a airport that doesn't have full service fuel. Well, that's fine and dandy until you are coming home and you look out on the wing and you realize that the fuel cap is gone. You say you're in a Piper, or you're in a Cessna, and all of a sudden you're looking at the fuel gauges and you realize that the right fuel tank is empty, and you've only got 18 gallons left instead of 36 gallons. So now it's, oh geez, my only option is to stop at a little airport up here. And guess what? They don't have full service fuel. It's self-service fuel. So that's something that we've talked about in previous episodes, but I think most of us take it for granted. But it's something that you need to do. You need to know how to do that.
Yeah, and the other thing we talked about was strange airports, right? And I think we at our school are in a dilemma where we go to the same 4 to 5 airports all the time. I've tried to come up with many ideas on how we can expand that, get to a dozen or 15 different airports. You start getting into a time constraint and distance restraints and other things like that, but we're not doing our students very much justice if they've only been to 4 airports. And I think it's important that you show private students, and then specifically instrument students, what it's like to be put in a situation where they're at a strange airport and they don't really know where to go, how to get to that terminal procedures chart and understand what that airport offers or doesn't offer. What is a different approach? If I've never shot an approach, can I really shoot that approach? Can I read, I know I can shoot the Navasota approach that I haven't almost memorized. I don't know if I could shoot an approach into Midland, Texas, because I've never looked at the approach plate, but I hope I can. But we need to challenge each other and try and do those things.
Maybe it's a good idea for the student pilot to see the instructor pilot go into an airport to which the instructor pilot has never been to. Hey, you want to go to airport XYZ? Yeah, let's go. I've never been there before. Let's go.
Yeah, that's definitely a tactic that I'm trying to incorporate at the school for sure, because there's plenty of options and there's ways to make it happen. We've probably landed at a bunch of them, but we probably never stopped either, right? It'd be nice just to go in and stop and understand what services they have and what all's available to you. Let's talk a little bit about check rides. You definitely see common sense leave the airplane, I'm sure, on check rides. But let's talk about that diverting one and some of the common sense that you look for there, and just replay that if we have to. But talk about common sense on check rides and where applicants aren't meeting the mark, maybe.
Well, I give a scenario where they do have to divert, and whether it be a medical thing or an airplane issue, I want to see them point the airplane toward the new airport. And, if you're flying along and the airport is to the east, let's say we're flying north and we know the airplane is to the east. Well, as strange as it sounds, let's turn the airplane to the east first, and then let's look in the GPS. Let's not go 5 miles to the north or 5 miles out of the way. That's about 2.5 minutes at our airplane speeds. Let's aim toward where we think the airport is. You probably have a pretty good idea. I think it's about 90 degrees or 100 degrees. So point the airplane over there. Now plug it in and fine tune it. I've had many. Well, I won't say many, but a few medical diversions in big airplanes. And boy, when I hear unconscious, not breathing, performing CPR, or getting out the AED, that airplane is turning now. Of course, we need to coordinate with ATC, but yeah, we're declaring an emergency. We're going to Phoenix now. There's no dilly-dallying around when it comes to a human life. Or, if the airplane is compromised, we may be dealing with a bunch of human lives.
For sure. I know you've told the story, and we'll wrap up the day with this and recap on the show, but where does common sense leave the window in the oral exam as it relates to weight and balance and fuel and some simple calculations there?
Yeah, and let me just go back to the actual divert scenario. Let's say you are diverting. Do we need to fly over midfield, enter a right teardrop to enter a left downwind to the runway that is the wind is favoring? No, we don't. We can go straight in. We can do whatever we want. All those, and we're talking about a non-controlled airport, obviously. But, if it is a controlled airport, the ATC is going to work with you, and they're going to move everybody out of the way, and they're going to tell you to land straight in. So even if it's a non-controlled airport, especially if you're practicing this and there's nobody in the pattern, I mean, that's a perfect scenario, a perfect training scenario to say, hey, let's go straight in. We're going to land downwind with a 3-knot tailwind. But getting back to your recent question about in the oral, I give them an out-of-weight scenario. And I ask what the weight is, what our takeoff weight's going to be, what our max takeoff weight is going to be. And then I say, okay, let's say my friend shows up and my friend weighs X. And we add X to what we weigh, and we are now max takeoff weight plus a little bit. And my question is always, can he go? And I'd say 98% of the people say no. And the airport that we're going to, we're going to land with, and again, we're in a Warrior-type airplane. We're going to land with 22 gallons worth of fuel, and maybe we're 18 pounds overweight. So we can't take off 3 gallons and land, and take off 18 pounds, and now we're going to land with, I think I said land with 22 gallons. Now we're going to land with 19 gallons. And that's what I'm getting. And usually I'll query them a little bit. I'll say, oh, geez, so that's bad. That's too bad. I don't want to go unless my friend can go with us. And then the applicant will usually say, well, we could do this. I'll say, well, why didn't you say that initially? I mean, why don't we try to become mission-oriented? And we've used that phrase on this podcast a lot, is mission-oriented. And the mission, it just isn't flight training, because in flight training, there's always something we can do on the ground. We can always cancel the flight. There's a cloud in the sky. Well, let's just cancel the flight and do ground, because we got to do ground anyway. All right, and it becomes very convenient for us. But how about, instead of flying to where the cloud was, why don't we go to the other way, because there's no clouds over there? Oh, yeah, geez, we can change things up a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of pieces of common sense that would make being a pilot easier, make it safer, and hopefully we've shared some of that with you today. If you have a check ride in the future, short future, make sure you know that the DPE wants you to use common sense and really put a practical spin on what you're trying to get done for the greater good of the plane and the people and safety. Not just the only cautious answer is going to be the best right one. We talked a little bit about flying, the common sense around listening to the radios when you're on the ground, thinking through kind of building that picture of what's in the air around you. The yellow arc is your friend on calm days without turbulence. And then we talked about some things maybe the CFIs listening could teach pumping fuel, taking fuel out of an aircraft, energy management, etc. Until next week or 2 weeks from now, as always, fly safely and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.